Welcome to the final video in the 308 Winchester Reloading Series here at Big Wyoming. If you followed along in this series, you know that we made short videos detailing our reloading process for this rifle. The purpose of this video is to wrap all of those up into one video so you can sit down start to finish and see how we loaded for the rifle and what results we achieved. The rifle itself is a Remington 700 short action that has a Bartline heavy varmint contour barrel installed on it. The twist is 1 in 10. Our expectation for this rifle was a half MOA or better. We started out with 100 rounds of factory ammunition that happened to be loaded in Lapua Brass. Shooting that factory ammunition did a few things for us. One, it established a baseline for the accuracy of the rifle. It gave us fire-formed brass to work with when we were reloading. And finally, it enabled us to break in the barrel a little bit. We took that brass, chose our components, and we started loading. The first thing we did was a Satterley ladder test using our magnetospeed chronograph. Once that velocity node was identified and we verified it through some more loadings, we moved on to our seating depth test. Testing various seating depths, base to ogive, we found one that was in a node that showed very promising accuracy results. Now, let's chronicle how we prepared our brass, how we trimmed it, how we charged it, loaded bullets, and our final results. Alright, as you can see here, we already got the bench source set up and we're annealing our brass. Why do we anneal our brass? So it's going to soften our shoulder case neck junction and our case neck itself. That's going to avoid work hardening as we resize the brass and we bump the shoulder. What this does is it's going to give a longer life to our brass. Like I said, this brass is getting ready for its 6th firing. Hoping to get maybe 20. We're going to go essentially until our primer pockets loosen up a little bit. The other reason we anneal our brass is we want to get a uniform neck tension. So all this brass is heated to the same and then it's worked through the dies, and as we set that final neck diameter, we have a good neck tension on the brass, which we hope gives us more consistent reloads. So as you can see, I use the bench source annealer to do my brass. I would say that annealing is an advanced technique. If you're a new reloader, don't sweat the details just yet. Work on getting yourself some good loads, understanding how everything works, and then we can graduate to this. Before I had the bench source, I used a drill and a torch, but I think the bench source has given me a little more consistency. Recently I heard that one of the famous I'm going to say bench rest F-class, I know he's been in a lot of disciplines, he's an awesome shooter, and he has the credentials to back it up. The new rage is this amp annealer, which is an induction annealer. I'm sure if you do a quick search you can find it, but he made the statement that if you don't have an amp annealer, don't waste your time annealing. To me, that's a pretty grand statement. I mean, on one hand, who am I to argue with a world-class shooter? But on the other hand, I think what we're shooting for here, pun intended, is to prolong the life of our brass, to make it where we can work it through that shoulder bump, we can work the neck down, and we can get that consistent tension. I think if we weren't to do that, our brass would last half as long, if that, and then we would have varying tensions on our neck. You know, there's been a lot of medals, a lot of championships won with annealed brass before the amp came along. You know, if you can afford one, I say do it. I'm very pleased with this bench source annealer, and I think it helps us out quite a bit. Basic setup on it is I try to keep that blue flame about an inch from my shoulder neck junction. I think I'm going about 5 seconds once that brass hits the flame, and you can see the color change down the case. And then of course it rotates out, dumps in our pan, and we're working through 100 pieces of brass. What you don't see off camera is I'm pulling this brass out of my red MTM container. I'm inspecting it, maybe giving it a little wipe down before I set it in the carousel. This lets me make sure all my brass is uniform. I don't see anything really weird with it. I do not pop the primers out. That's going to happen in the next step, which is going to be our sizing step. We're going to bump the shoulder, squeeze the neck, and run it through a mandrel. And this annealing prepares it for that. And now we're ready for our sizing operation. But before we do that, I had a comment from a viewer about how we were measuring our headspace when we set up our bushing die. So I'm using a Wilson case gauge with the micrometer top. What we do is we install the case in there, we put the micrometer top on, and we take a reading by spinning this dial. And where we stop, I don't know if you can see that, is our headspace relative to a SAMI chamber. So we're right about 3.5 or 4 thousandths over a SAMI chamber. So I annealed with primers in, and I took my initial readings with primers in. So sure enough, the Wilson instructions for the headspace gauge and the micrometer top suggest that everything be done with primers out. You could have a crater in the primer could be sitting proud in the brass, and it could skew that reading. And a viewer pointed this out to me, so I was very thankful for that. I went back and I did test the cases with and without primers, and in this case I was not seeing any difference, but we took the advice, we followed the instructions, we went ahead and decapped all our brass, and then we went ahead and tumbled it clean after that operation. So right now, we've annealed our brass. There's a video on that. We've got a video on the dies that we're going to use for this sizing process and how we measure the headspace. And we've cleaned our brass. So now we're going to do all our sizing operations in this video. So as you can see, with what I do is I've got 10 cases laid out. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take a reading on this one and set up our shoulder bump. So we're right at 4 thousandths. So we're looking for 1 to 2 thousandths shoulder bump. I've installed the Wilson bushing die, but I've removed the decapping pin, and what holds the bushing in is that area right there. All we're using this for is to bump the shoulder. So we're going to put a little case lube on. Didn't feel like we touched our shoulder, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at that one. So what we'll do is we wipe our case lube off. We go ahead and put this back in there. We're going to take another reading, and we're still at 4 thousandths, so we need to come in on that die. So we'll just come in a little bit, because I know we're pretty close from previous settings. Relube, resize. Clean and measure. Okay, so we went from 4,000ths to 5,000ths. What we actually saw was we saw the case grow a little bit. So we're getting close. We're not actually bumping the shoulder yet, but since we squeezed the base a little more, we've seen that case grow. So we're going to come in a little bit more, tighten everything down, a little bit of lube, one more shot through the die. So normally I'm going to reload 10 cases for this video. What I'll do is these setup cases, sometimes you'll get a little deep, you'll bump the shoulder more than you want to. They've been worked several times. We're going to keep going here. I'll use these setup cases, I'll mark them with a Sharpie. And what we'll do with these setup cases is I'll use these for foulers when I go to the range. So until we touch that shoulder, this process is just kind of a trial and error. All right, so we went from 4 to 3 right there. So we did bump 1,000ths, which is acceptable. We'll make sure our die is tight on the press. Just give it a little more. We're going to mark this one as a fouler. Put it beside that other one right there. We'll go ahead and take a measurement on one of these, and this will be our verification that we're getting what we want. So right here we're about 3.5, which through experience that's where most of my cases end up, is 3.5. Go ahead and wipe that lube off. Take a quick measurement. I think we're right where we want to be. We're going to give it just a little. Now when you're doing 100 pieces of brass, once you get this measurement nailed down, I usually don't take a look anymore at what we're doing. Since we're doing 10 here, we'll go ahead and make sure we're getting what we want. one's a solid 3 as we come in to the die. That's a solid 2, so we're bumping 1,000. So we are happy with that. Just a little bit of lube on each one of these. We'll run it through this die. Then we'll be ready for the next step in our process. Alright, so we've bumped our shoulders back. Our next step is to take care of these necks. What I'm using for that is a Wilson neck bushing die. In this instance, we're going to use a 335 bushing. So our 2 screws are undone on the top here. One's just loosened so we can pivot that out of the way. Per the instructions, the numbers go up. So we'll fit that bushing in there. Bring this back around. Go ahead and start our screws in. Even though our decapping pin is not required, we're going to use it as an alignment tool before we tighten everything down. So what we'll do is we'll take a shell, put it in there, make sure that pin is centered, and then we're going to come back and we're going to line up these screws and go ahead and give them a real quick tightening. So we're going to use our arbor press for this. This is pretty simple. Your shell to be sized is going to go in this end until it won't go anymore. Turn that upside down, center it, and then we just press it in until it's flush. Looks like I need to tighten a little bit over here. And we flip that over, and then we use that pin to drive our brass casing out. And you can see where it's sized that portion of the neck. Now some of these I just put a light touch of lube on there. Doesn't really take much at all. And we're going to drive that case in until it's flush. Flip it. And pop it out. I think this gives us a little more precise control over the neck versus using the bushing die itself. But if you stick with us, there's only one way to find out. We're going to do that experiment. We're going to run some through the bushing die. We're going to run some this way. We're going to see what kind of difference it makes on the target. We're going to see if it makes a difference with our velocity and our seating pressure. So once you get going on this process, it really doesn't take too long. I know it seems like an added step. We're touching an additional die. And if that's what you're thinking right now, well, you just wait a minute. Because we got one more die after this that we're going to run through twice. Alright, that's it for those. So we need to remove our die that we used for a bump. The next die we're going to install is a mandrel die. Again, this is the LE Wilson mandrel die that we talked about in our die usage video. What I like to do with this one is pull it out. Make sure that mandrel looks good. And just give it a little bit of lube on there. Nothing excessive. And we'll bring that back in. And now we're going to run these cases over the mandrel die. And that sets our final diameter for the inside of the neck. This die is 0.3075. And there's not a lot of restriction as you run through here, but the idea is that we're kind of evening the inside of the neck. We're removing any inconsistencies that may exist. Bolt Action Reloading is a wonderful channel. I watched it. One of the things he said that kind of stuck with me, if I'm going to have a consistent area on my neck, I would prefer that it be the inside of my neck, because that's what grips the bullet. That's what helps set our final bullet grip before we leave the rifle. So we've run those through once. We're going to do it one more time. And that's just to make sure that it's all as even as possible. And you can still feel a little pressure as I run this through the second time. And if you examine the necks, you'll see where that mandrel has touched our sized portion. Alright, so there you have it. What we'll do is we'll wipe this brass down to get as much of that sizing wax off as we can. The next thing is we're going to trim and chamfer the brass so the necks will accept the bullet pretty easy, and then we're on to the other steps. So just in review, what we did here is we bumped the shoulder, in this case 1/1000ths, which will work on my rifle. That's been verified. Usually 1 to 2/1000ths is good for a bolt action, and that's what we're working with right here. Once those shoulders were bumped, we used the Wilson neck die to knock those necks down, and we used a 335 bushing. Once the necks were knocked down, we went back to the Wilson mandrel die, which has a diameter of 0.3075, and we set the ID of those necks 3075 with that mandrel, and we ran through twice just to fix any inconsistencies we might find. We've annealed, we've deprimed, we've cleaned, we've worked our brass over, And now we're going to trim. That'll be the next video. We'll show you how we trim and we get ready for our final loading. So last time we finished sizing our brass. Now we need to do trimming, chamfering, and we're going to brush the necks. So we're going to do that. I've got a L.E. Wilson trimmer here. What we've set up to for this 308 brass, the spec in the book is 2.005 inches. We're doing 2 inches even, and one reason I do that is because I initially like to touch every piece of brass, trim it the same, and even up the case necks. And this L.E. Wilson trimmer is really good at evening those case necks. That's one reason we use it. So to use this trimmer, we've basically got a shell holder. This one is 243, 308, 358 for fired cases. So be sure when you look at these shell holders, you specify fired or unfired cases. What you do, put it in the shell holder, give it a tap, set it in here. We have the power adapter for our trimmer. Start that, bring it in, and you see those brass shavings come off, and we're just touching the end of it. Then we give it a tap, get that piece of brass out, and as you can see, we've evened up the end there. So some of the brass we're going to barely touch because we get very little growth based on how we size our brass, which is bump the shoulder, set the necks, and then use a mandrel. So this one didn't get touched very much at all. Knock it out of there, take a look at it. There we go. We've got a caliper set up for 2 inches. That fits in there just perfect. So let me do a couple more pieces of brass. Once again, we put the rim with the line on the shell holder, tap it in, hold it down, start our power drill, and just try to touch that brass off. So that one didn't get touched at all. It's a little under our 2-inch mark, and we'll grow to it. Whew. I got a little rough with that one. So as you can see, that's nice and even across the neck. You don't do any damage when you knock those things out of there. That one's just cleaned up a little bit. And we touch that one up a little bit. So this L.E. Wilson trimmer is really the best trimmer that I have seen as far as consistency goes with these brass cases. Once you set this stop to the face of the trimmer, you get a consistent length, and it straightens that neck up really good. So then we're going to come in here and we're going to do a quick chamfer on the inside and outside of the case. Not getting real aggressive with this. Just kind of knocking that, as you trim, you create a burr that you can fill with your thumbnail on the outside, and that same burr is created on the inside. So what that allows us to do is knock that off for more consistent bullet seating and chambering of these rounds once they're fully loaded. So once that's finished, I brush the inside of my case necks. I've got a 30 caliber brush. nylon chucked up in a hand drill, and we just do quick run in and out. That's going to remove, if there's a possibility, any kind of lube in there, and it's going to make our inside neck surface smooth and give us a more consistent bullet seating pressure, which is what we're after. So there's a good piece of cleaned up brass once we're finished. Can't feel that burr anymore. The inside's chamfered, the neck is brushed. Our next job is we're going to get through the rest of these 50 pieces of brass. So at the end of the last video, we went ahead and we made it through these 50 pieces of brass. We trimmed them to size, we chamfered the inside and outside neck, and then we gave them a quick brush. So now we're going to use our Remington 9.5 large rifle primers, and I use the Lee hand primer is what I use to get this done. So I've already loaded the primers. I've got them flipped in the tray. I got everything turned around. We cycle it once to get a primer ready to go. And what I like to do on these is I'll insert the shell. I apply pressure and twist it slowly, and then go ahead and seat it fully. And there's what we end up with. Next one's ready to go. One more time. I insert the shell, apply a little pressure, twist it. That seems to line things up a little better. And then I go ahead and seat the primer fully. Now, this happens sometimes. That primer is not flush enough to come out. You can feel it right there, it's hitting. So I turn this a little bit. I gotta pop that top off to get my primers out. We got one that's flipped, everything's as it should. So what I'll do is I'll put that back in there, and I'll just give it another strong seat, and it comes right out. That happens from time to time. I'm gonna say maybe, I don't know, 1 in 20. I'll probably have 3 or 4 right in a row as we go. So once again, I load the primer in the barrel. A little bit of pressure, I twist that shell, and you can feel it seat all the way in there just right. Comes right out. So I like the hand primer. It gives me a feeling how the primers are going in there. I don't clean my primer pockets. I haven't seen any need to. They seem to seat just fine, and I haven't seen any difference in the performance of my hand loads with clean primer pockets versus the dirty. I think what we're seeing here is I'm holding this at an angle for the camera, so I'm having trouble with the second feed. So that also allows me to feel my primer pockets. I'm hoping to get several firings on this brass, and by several I mean maybe upwards of 20 firings on it. And what I plan to see is my primer pockets will get really loose, and they'll no longer hold the primer like we want to. So again, I think what we got going on here is I'm kind of holding this at an odd angle for the camera, and I got a couple stacked up right there. I haven't had hardly any trouble. This is my second Lee hand primer I've had over several years of use. They've always worked real well. I think the last one of the cast pieces finally broke on it. Some of the new brass, there we go. We got another one that's just a little proud after it's been seated. So we pop that out, make sure we got all those primers out of the way. We'll double check, make sure they're aligned properly. Put that back in the top, give it a little twist, and just a little more seating pressure, and that's all it took. You guys can comment below, maybe that's a product of me not cleaning my primer pockets. Maybe that's what I'm seeing as we go through this. So let's do a couple more. I think you get the idea, it's pretty basic. We're feeling for the primers to be fully seated. We're making sure our primer pockets are not too loose. And that thing seems to be rolling along right now. All right, so we made pretty quick work of priming those cases. We got 50 of them primed. So I've got a couple options here as far as what I use to charge my powder. I have a RCBS Charge Master Light. I have the Redding powder measure with the BR3 Competition, I believe. Adjustments on it where I can throw powder, and then I have my mechanical scale. I use my mechanical scale to verify either one of these because gravity doesn't lie. So right now we've got a charge on the mechanical scale. I don't know if you can see right here. What I've done is I put a camera in front of it so I get a little better resolution on that indicator, because I guess my eyes are getting a little low. So that's right on our specified charge of 42.3 grains. Off to the side, I've got my cases with a funnel in it. So I'll go ahead and pour that one on a case. Then I place my bucket back on the RCBS. It's in automatic mode. While it's doing that, I make sure all the powder has gone down into the case, and I move the funnel to the next empty case while we're waiting on that. And what I'll do is, like if I'm doing a group of 50 or 100, is I'll randomly weigh them on the mechanical scale to make sure that it's in that 0.1 grain plus or minus that it's advertised as. And if you go way back to the beginning, when we found out our powder charge, we are 42.3 with our node running from 42.2 to 42.4. So we do have a little room on each side of that specified powder charge. So we'll bring that over to the scale. So that one actually looks just about 0.1 light. So it's about 42.2. I'm not going to sweat the details because I know I'm within my node. I know that charge will fall within the rest of them. So I'm going to pour that into the empty case using my funnel. Put my bucket back on the scale. When it zeroes and starts, I'm going to move the funnel over. So when it comes to charging your rounds, a rhythm is very important. So you can avoid double charges, you can avoid mistakes. Anything doing with powder charging is very important. You need to keep close track of what you're doing. The possibility of a double charge on these 308 rounds is really negligible because you would overfill the case, but at the same time you're going to make a mess for yourself, so it's something worth watching. So our RCBS Charge Master went off. It's telling us 42.3. We'll do a few more on the mechanical scale just so you get the idea of where we're at. So that one's actually coming up about 1.5 shy. So when I see something like that, I'll go ahead and throw it back in the bucket here. We'll let everything stable out and we'll start another charge.
There, at one time, I was weighing every charge. I was trickling them up. That would have been an excellent one to use my trickler and go ahead and get it right where it needs to be. But I found out, since I'm in that node, that I don't have to be as picky. I can be 0.1 on either side, but sometimes this scale throws out of that. We did do a 30-minute warm-up, at least, and a calibration on our RCBS scale. So that one's maybe half a grain shy of what we want. That's going to be within our spec. We're going to go ahead and charge that one. Shake it down. Replace our bucket. As that stables out, we're going to move our funnel over. All right, we got 10 cases charged with powder. It's always good to do a visual inspection of all those cases. Make sure they have the powder in them, that everything looks normal, nothing's overcharged, nothing's empty, you didn't skip one. That way you don't have any problems at the range. So for our seating evolution, we use a K&M arbor press with a Wilson Micrometer seating die. So this die is made up of a couple parts. You have this stem that has a coarse adjustment on it. Fits in there really snug. And then you can move this by thousandths of an inch to get that fine seating depth that you're looking for. So we we seat all our cartridges using a CBTO cartridge base to ogive of 2.126. So this die is already set up for that. That's all we've been using it for. So essentially what we do is we take a charged case, set it in this base, set the bullet, bring the die down over it, center it, and seat till we bottom out. There's one of our finished rounds. So I've switched to this Wilson inline seater die, and I can tell you, I think it's made the most difference with my reloading. Is I can feel the pressure as the bullet seats. I can kind of tell if there's any problems. And it just gives me a lot more feel than any of the press mounted seaters that I had. So these have a light seating pressure because we use that mandrel to run our ID of our necks back out. But I can tell you that I've taken these, I've pushed on the table with them, I haven't been able to move the projectile once it's seated. I've had several in the magazine, they don't move under recoil. So we have enough seating pressure to hold the bullet in place. And the right amount of seating pressure that gives us consistent release, which leads to our accuracy. So again, this is another one of those steps that looks pretty hands-on because we're using the Wilson equipment. But once you hit your rhythm, it goes pretty fast. there we are. There's 10 of the 50 that are loaded. So as of right now, you've seen my entire process of loading for this heavy varmint 308 Winchester. I'll go ahead and I'll burn through these other 40 while I'm down here and I got everything fired up.
First of all, if you've made it this far in the video, congratulations. You've seen our entire reloading process, from what the rifle is, the Satterley, the seating depth, the brass preparation, the trimming, the bullet seating, powder charging. This is the representative group, the first group that I shot out of those 50 rounds that we loaded. As you can see, it's 0.41 inches, it's under 0.4 MOA. Our range is 105 yards, so that puts us just under it. And this is really about what I get out of the rifle with this method of loading, this combination of primer, brass, powder, and bullet. So I hope you learned something from this series. I hope you stick with us. We're going to use this rifle as a testing platform. We're going to test different loading methods. We're going to test different components. And then I think we may even change a few things on the rifle as we go forward. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much if you sat through this video. If you're interested in this series or want to see more, I need you to comment. I need you to like. I need you to subscribe. God bless. I'll see you on the other side.